another thing that I've been sort of discovering as time goes on, that it's this whole concept of tension and release, which a lot of our music is based on that, and a lot of jazz or any kind of music really is based on that, where you're basically either playing on top of a chord, if you're sitting on a chord and playing, or you're playing up to a chord. So like if I was playing on E minor or something, you're just playing, I could either be playing this E minor scale, I'm just basically sitting on it. Or I could take it, what I like to try to do most of the time is sort of take people on some kind of a musical journey. And the way to do that, what I found, is basically using tension and release. So if I started saying, you're out and then kind of back home again. And the way I did it that time was like a diminished kind of thing. That's one way you can do it, or there's hundreds of different ways. I think pretty much what I've found based on, like if you take a tritone, which is splitting the octave in half, here. And it's, there's one tritone in an octave. The tritone wants to resolve. The tritone is basically the basic building block of music, Western music, as far as I'm concerned. If you hear that tritone right there, if you move each of those notes out the half step, you'll hear this. It resolves, right? If you move them both in a half step, it resolves to a different chord. So anytime that you've got that tritone relationship, you've got tension. This is tense. This is resolved, right? But the tritone is in the dominant seventh chord. That's inherent in the dominant seventh chord. So basically, anytime you have a dominant seventh chord, you have a chord that wants to resolve and go from tension to release. And that, it might seem complicated, it might seem simple to some people, but it really is basically simple, and that is something a power that you can use when you're improvising to take people all over the place. The ultimate would be in jazz as progression. You can take a blues form, a simple 12-bar blues form, and substitute these dominant seventh things coming down and basically sound. It sounds like a chromatic scale going down, and it's basically this kind of dominant seventh chord going like that. The idea is, for me, you can use that. I don't want to get too complicated here, and I feel like I might be doing that already. But the simple germ of the idea is that you can take people out into like tense land, or you can bring them back into resolved land. And personally, I'm thinking about that constantly while I'm playing. I'm not thinking, because the other thing is I try not to think about anything when I'm playing. Just make the mind go blank and let the stuff pour out of you.
Okay, so in that clip, Trey mentions how important and foundational tension and release is to music in general, and especially to improvising and jamming. And he also mentions a little bit about some jazzy or bluesy examples of that using dominant chords, and how inside of every dominant chord lives that tritone, which is when you split the octave in half. And I thought that'd be a good point to look into just a little bit here. So what I'm going to do here is lay out just the first little bit of a blues with sort of Stormy Monday in mind as an example. And I'm not going to do the whole progression, but really just the first half or so to make the point here. And I'll do like a G blues, so it'll be like this. We'll say G7. Then let's do like a C9. Now let's go back to G7. Then we'll go up to A flat 7. And then that's it. We'll just repeat that. Here's our C9. Okay, every single one of those chords was some type of dominant chord, so there's a lot of room for tension and release, that's for sure. If we even just look at the first little bit here, the G7. Now what Trey was saying is that inside of every dominant chord is the tritone, And a lot of times what you can do is do a tritone substitution on some of these chords. I think that's what he was kind of hitting on there. So even when we look at this right out of the gate, we can lead into the second chord, which was the C9 chord, by doing maybe like a D flat 7 kind of thing. So if we were over here, okay, now what I was doing there is just doing my G7. And then right there, I'm doing that D flat to the C9 and just kind of playing arpeggios. And notice, when you play a C9 chord in this context, try to envision, these different chord shapes. Like, for example, we could do this C9 like this. We could do more of like a C7 over here, maybe a 13. At any rate, there are things that are overlaid or that live inside of this chord. One of them, the most noteworthy, would be the G minor pentatonic and G Dorian. So that's living inside of there too. So as we head down from the G7, we can go between arpeggios of C7 and the minor pentatonic for G. Every single thing will also be compatible with G minor pentatonic, which is a really awesome thing because we can kind of slip outside for a moment, kind of like what Trey was saying, and then bring it back home to the glue, which is the minor pentatonic. Okay, so now after this this change to the C9, we come back to G7. Okay, then we had this A flat, or G sharp, whatever you want to, it's out of key anyway, but I'm going to call it A flat 7. Now here's a cool thing here. Now let's take that change and let's see what else we can get out of this. Now what I see here is we can have, let's say, an A flat 13 chord. So if you're familiar with this kind of voicing, like let's say you go 4, 5, 6, and then you can do the finger in a bunch of different ways. You can go like that, or you can use your thumb, do it like that. Okay, now especially when we have a 13 chord like this, if you're playing an A flat 13, the tritone of A flat is a D natural. That's when you cut the octave of A flat in half, you would get D natural. Now, an interesting thing happens here. If we play everything the same, but change the bass note to a D instead of an A flat, now we have a D7 sharp 9, which is the 5th of G, and it leads it perfectly back to that G7 we were doing. Okay, so when we have this A7, or sorry, A flat 7 or 13, maybe think to yourself in layers. Okay, we've got this chord here for a moment, and then we can switch to the 5th of G, and then we bring it back home. Now in the intro, the very beginning of the video, I did a little couple second clip of audio, and I'm going to show what that lick was and the logic of it, which ties exactly into what I just did. So the thing that I played was like this. I'll do that again. Okay, now, here's what that is. What's happening here is when we have these tritone substitutions, there's this really amazing thing that can connect them together, which is when you do the half whole step scale. Some people think of that as like a separate scale, the diminished scale. I'm coming from a bit of a different place with my point of view on that, coming from more of the Barry Harris school of thought, which I've mentioned a bunch of times in different videos. But this pattern, when we go, it's really beautiful, and it kind of cascades through the A flat 7 to the D7, A flat 7 to D7. It kind of goes back and forth. And another tune that this reminds me of, that Trey uses this sort of thing in, but in a different way, is in Reba, when he has the part, and I'm just going off the top of my head, something similar to what he does, and that is he'll do that where he has these triads, and then they're moving in these diagonal patterns going by tritones. And so this lick that I'm doing here is very similar. So think of it as like the dominant 7 of A flat, which is a G flat. It goes like that, and then the minor third up to the major third. And there's a really interesting thing with it. Not only can you think of it as the half whole kind of diminished scale, but you can also think of it as sort of like a Lydian dominant kind of vibe, because you have, let's say here's our root, that's A flat. Now the flattened 7th is G flat. That's what I just started with. Now I go to the minor third up to the major third, which is a feature of blues. If we really think about it, when you play a blues, you're really kind of going between the major third and the minor third a lot of times, or at least I am. So that's in play. So we've got the flattened 7th up to the root, the minor third to the major third, the sharp 4, which is the kind of Lydian note, up to the 5th. Now remember, we're kind of seeing this as 2 chords in one. It's also going to play into our D chord. Now, there are a bunch of different ways you can see this. How I see it is this combination of the A flat chord that I just did as a 13. The D7 sharp 9 is also a flat 9. You know, there's an E flat in there as well, which is right here. So in that first part of the lick, you've got that, and then we're kind of continuing. Now, if we think about it, it's kind of like we're starting on D. In fact, let's do that, where we think of it starting on D on the 5th fret of A instead, and we go. Now, again, you can see that as you've got your D, your flat 9, your minor third, your major third, your sharp 4, your 5th, and then on and on it goes, as far as you want to take it. For the purpose of what I was doing, I wanted to, have sort of a lift off where there's tension, and my landing, I wanted to come back to G world, back to G7. And so what I did was I took a part of it, and then toward the end, I just resolved it back to a little G kind of dyad, where you have the major third with B and the root on top. So that's just one little tiny taste of what you can do with that. Now, I also harmonized that line in the intro audio that I did. And if you think about your tritone, you have your octave, you cut that in half, and then if you slice that in half, you get a minor third. So this is where the diminished comes into play. This is why I would encourage you, if you haven't tried this, to really hear the diminished sound that lives inside of dominant chords. If we keep cutting that octave in half, we get 4 pieces then, and it's a stacking of minor thirds. Okay, so where I'm going with this is that if we take this tritone here that we have and we cut that in half, we would get also a B natural. The D we already accounted for, and the other tone you could get is an F natural. So this is kind of cool. You could do the same kind of lick that I was doing here, leading up to the A flat. You can do that starting on an A this time, which is the flat 9 of the A flat, but that's the dominant 7 of B, so it works the same way as before. Like that. You could do it with the F as well. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of riff around with this, and I'm also going to try to get another thing into my playing here, which is I'm going to try to sort of play lead, but paint the lead with the chords that are being played with a little bit of arpeggios and some stuff like that. Yeah, so hopefully that gives you a couple ideas to play around with your dominant chords to create some tension and then hopefully some release too. That's just as important. But these patterns are just a couple examples. There are tons and tons of different ways you can go with it. So I would encourage you to maybe loop a little blues pattern or something maybe similar to what I did and kind of have at it. And let me know if you guys have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.